All right, so here we are for the last lecture of week one. And I'll tell you, if we were meeting face to face, this would simply have been me talking for the entire hour and 20 minutes. But, and I won't do that often this semester, but sometimes we really need to pause and make sure that everybody is on the same page, because there is some content here that I think will be formative of your own ideas about how to approach half of humanity when thinking about making the world a better place. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman and the Economics of Gender. This could just as easily have been called Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Economic Capitalist. She has a pretty big break with Bellamy in some important ways. So, you know, she's thinking as a material feminist, and her concerns here are definitely the concerns of a woman who's considering, well, what would it take to bring about gender equality? And should women be paid, and how do we design those spaces? And so she's definitely thinking from the perspective of women who employ servants, and also from the perspective of women who are servants. She wrote a book before Herland. Herland was serialized, so she had, Charlotte Perkins Gilman had a publication, a magazine that was sort of, so people subscribed and it would come in the mail every month. It was called Forerunner. And so Herland appeared first in Forerunner as a serial. So they would get a chapter every month. And before Herland, in 1898, she had an actual book come out. And this was not serialized. This was her actual book, Women in Economics, the study of the economic relation between men and women as a factor in social evolution. And her point was simply that our species is the only species where where the female of the species relies on the male for its survival. And she genuinely believed, and a lot of her followers and then and since believed, that the evolution of the human race would be hastened by removing domestic work and childcare from the home and allowing women to undertake motherhood and paid employment, so they could be economically independent from men. And so that's the main idea of this text. It was considered an important text when it was first published, and people still read it today. So when you think about her as maybe a short story writer, or the writer of this utopian novel, Herland, before that, she was writing about economics. So let's talk about other things she was writing. She wrote another novel that was like Herland. It was serialized. So Herland is published during the year 1915. It's published one chapter every month. And what Diantha did, another Charlotte Perkins Gilman's novels, was published about 5 years before. And it's what a lot of feminist scholars would call a pragmatopian, or I guess utopian scholars would call it too. And a pragmatopian fiction is a story which revises contemporary, familiar contemporary settings in a mode of notably modest, feasible feminist utopias. And what that means is there's no mesmerism. Nobody goes to sleep and wakes up at a different time. Nobody travels to an island that's run by women in this story. But what does happen is some of the ideas that are expressed earlier in, I beg your pardon, in Women in Economics, those ideas are expressed more fully in what Diantha did, but in a story format, right? So it's a narrative. And I'm just gonna read you a quick quote. So here's what the story is about. The story is about a young woman, Diantha, who starts running a business. She says, I'm gonna have a boarding house so that instead of having your maid live inside your house, which is what was normal then for people who could afford maids, all the maids would live together in a boarding house that Diantha ran. She also delivered food, hot food houses. She did laundry. So she had this whole industry around looking after the household as a professional, as an entrepreneur. And she's really, really, really good at it. She pays better wages than some of the girls' former mistresses, and she keeps the girls from being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted because they have low status in the household, but they live there as servants. So one of the people who is bankrolling Diantha's business, where she manages all of these household tasks outside of the house as an entrepreneur, one of the women who's bankrolling it, Mrs. Weatherstone, says, "Oh my gosh, Diantha, you don't understand how big this is." And now I'm going to quote. Vivica encouraged Diantha to see domestic reform in terms of profit as well as female and emancipation. "I don't think you even realize the money there is in this thing," said Mrs. Weatherstone. "You are interested in establishing the working girls and saving money and time for the housewives. I'm interested in making money out of it. Honestly, it could be such a triumph." So clearly, this is not a socialist impulse on the part of Gilman. It's not a socialist impulse, and if we understand socialism to mean the public ownership of these operations outside of the home to deliver food, to cook food, to do laundry, and to assemble cleaning crew, right? This is understood by Gilman very differently in what Diantha did from the way Bellamy understands it and promotes it, and looking backward. So that's, and by the way, I just want to give you a sense of the reach of, so Bellamy was a big deal at the time he was writing, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman has become a more important figure over time. In 1980, Carol Pateman wrote The Sexual Contract, which looked at women's lives as subordinate to men's and suggested some things. Carol Pateman is a political philosopher, and she basically suggested that women needed guaranteed minimum income in order to have political and social lives that were equal to men. She has The Sexual Contract, a great book, and I just wanted to share that with you. More recently, in the year 2000, I think this is 2019, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, the fabulous book. I just read it this past summer, and Godseed does some really interesting things there. But what she does best is explain why women are freer to enjoy their erotic lives when they're not as burdened by concerns like, so Gilman is suggesting, like, we have daycare centers and we run them professionally. And she's suggesting that, like, you know, quite some time ago. And even today, those are ideas that are slow to reach everywhere. We do not have universal daycare here in the United States, for example. So Godsey writes, and I'm just going to read this really briefly so we can finish up the lecture. The main idea is a pretty simple one, and it's been around for a long time. Is that and it's the idea that unregulated free markets disproportionately harm people who have primary responsibility for caregiving, right? And so right now, that still generally means women. And so Godsey here, and I'm quoting, she says, "When I say caregiving, I mean not only childbearing and childrearing, but also care for the elderly and care for the sick. So the basic idea is that free markets require or depend on the free labor of caregivers that caregivers provide free at home, mostly because it's expensive to pay for. If we move childcare and elderly care into the market, it would require vast amounts of public resources, which means higher taxes, and many countries prefer not to do this." So there you see this interplay between, could you have a business that provides these things, and then who would be able to afford it? And if the state wanted to afford it, by the state, I mean the government, at any level, it would be really expensive and taxes would have to go up. So women are sort of the way that this entire free market exists, because women are providing free labor to the market. I'm sorry about the whining. That is my dog. All right, so then we get to Herland, and I'm just about done here. And I just want to point out, oh, I forgot, this slide went earlier. Humans are the only species where the female depends on the male. And so here we have Herland, which was, I'm sorry, let me do something about that noise. I'm sorry about all of that crunkling noises. My puppy has a container that spinach came in, and he's chewing it on the floor. And so that made the noise. Okay, so Herland actually was the inspiration for the Wonder Woman series. We start to think about what we can know, or what we can ponder when we think about Herland. So as you're reading it, consider these questions. How much of gender identity? So I think of Herland as an experiment that Charlotte Perkins Gilman was doing and thinking about these specific questions, right? How much of gender identity is biologically determined? Is there such a thing as a woman's brain, right? And how much of it is socially constructed? How do we explain the power differences that are so common between men and women? Godsey would say that the power differences are because women are working for free. I think Gilman would agree with that too. So in order to really understand it, maybe we need to put women or men in their own space and see what we can do, right? See what we can do as an experiment in thinking about what lives would be like. How can women achieve professional, artistic, or even personal expression, full personal expression as individuals, when so much time goes, quite naturally perhaps, to activities surrounding childbearing and child rearing, child caretaking in general? Should people who want a more fair and harmonious society focus on the similarities or differences between men and women in thinking our way to a better future? And this is a question that really stumps me, even after having read Gilman, having read Bellamy, having thought about these issues for maybe your entire lifetime. I'm a pretty old lady here. I still don't know the answer to that last question. Maybe you have some ideas on it. But one way to think through these questions is to imagine a world populated by just women or just men, without the influence of the other gender, and see what would happen, what kind of society would emerge. All right, thanks so much for listening. We got through it. Woot! Sorry about all the noise on this recording.